Hello, Space Coast. I'm Ron Lighthall, and I am here with a very special guest, Mr. Mike Haridopolos, who in Brevard County, you know the name, you know the spelling. You are one of the great legislative minds that we've ever had grace Brevard County politically. A history background. So you're not one of these guys that was a lawyer and kind of worked his way through. So, you're kind of odd man out in the Florida State Senate. Most of those guys have law background.
I had a pleasure of teaching first at the old Brevard Community College, later at the University of Florida. Wrote a few books about Florida history and Florida politics. And I think that's so important to understand where we came from, who allowed us to stand on the shoulders of giants, not only the United States, but of course the great state of Florida. And to look at things as an everyday citizen, as opposed to everything looking at through the eyes of a lawyer, which is very different. So it was always interesting navigating the legislature, but it was a thrill of a lifetime being in the House and later the Senate, especially to lead the Senate. And I love Brevard County.
It's a very special place.
Oh, it is. And we're blessed to live on the water, and then the ocean's just a couple miles away. It's just a super place to live. And it's accessible to anywhere. I have a lot of clients around the country, and I can jump on an airplane, whether it be in Melbourne or more recently Orlando, and be there in a few hours. But more importantly, get back home and enjoy what is the great Brevard County.
We're not here to sell real estate today, though. As much as we love Brevard County, we know it's not without its faults, in the world of politics. And I mean, you've got to be coming down from this kind of contentious fight that has gone on recently with the county commission. One of those things that came up that was very contentious, it was wildly unpopular, but somehow kept resurfacing and, re-perpetuating itself into the discussion, was term limits.
Right. Yeah, I'm a strong advocate for term limits, and maybe in a selfish way. I never would have maybe had the chance to run for office back in 2000 had they not advocated for it in 1992, taking effect in 2000. And then I saw as a practitioner myself in the House, later the Senate, that term limits work. You have fresh ideas, new faces. You don't have that situation you have in Washington, D.C. with the same old people.
Right.
So when I heard this proposal about potentially weakening term limits, I wanted to stand up right away and say, no, term limits work. There's a lot of able people in Brevard County, let alone around the state, can really make a difference. And so in the Charter Review Commission, we killed the proposal to actually expand the amount of time politicians can serve. And then later, when we heard the story that a few commissioners have talked about potentially putting it on the ballot through the county commission, I'm glad to see we stood up again and said, bad idea. And I believe John Tobias effectively killed it in the end, which was nice. It was interesting to see how he played it out. But I know he's a big advocate for term limits as well. And they work. And our president of the United States lives under them. Of course, our governor lives under them. And
he likes the idea.
And he is right.
It minimizes corruption. It minimizes backdoor deals.
Yeah, and a lot of people say, like, well, you need to be there so long to understand it. No, you don't. And if you're a smart person, you can figure it out pretty quickly. And we do have to do that in the legislature. And I think I'll point to term limits in this way. We instituted term limits back in 2000 in Florida. We're the state with the big surplus. We're the state that's not raising taxes. We're the state that's growing not only our population, but more importantly, our economy, because we don't have those backroom deals that sometimes happen in states, or what you've seen more recently in Washington, D.C., where you have the entire Democrat leadership in the House is, I think, in their 80s.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, these people have been in Washington for too long, much like the president, at least in my opinion. So I think that you need to have people who understand what's going on in, quote, the real world. And when you have term limits and you have that turnover, it becomes that way. Because I can tell you, being a former legislator, a member of the legislature, when you have the lobbyists, you have the interest groups, you have other people, they're always kissing your butt. And they don't want to tell you no, so you're not facing reality enough. And so I think that perspective from a person who has to get that permit, who has to live under that tax, let alone other rules of the road in Florida, has a much better perspective of what needs to be done in Tallahassee and, of course, in our backyard here in Brevard County.
We've been very lucky in Brevard County at the state level that our representation has always been kind of that cream that rises in whatever committees they chair and things. I always admired Randy Fine's work ethic when it comes to what he's doing in Tallahassee. Some of the tweets and some of the emails and things going back and forth, I'm like, okay, well, we've seen that play out.
Well, what I like about Randy is he wants to get things done.
Mhm.
And he's going to go out there and push an issue. And if he hears a better idea, he's willing to accept it, which
Right,
is to his
right.
credit.
And he has a history of that, though.
Oh yeah, and look, he said, I really want to change the education system for the better because of what his kids experience. Again, term limits in effect here, and again, Brevard has a rich history. We know that Bill Posey, now our congressman, did a remarkable job in the House, later the Senate. Steve Christofoli's former speaker, myself as Senate president. We had a nice run here, but those were folks who lived under term limits, and I think that's the best thing we can do because if you're not under term limits, you want to kind of cut the latest deals, or you want to get along and go along as opposed to getting things done. And I think as a republic, we want to not increase the size and scope of government. I think just the opposite. We want the government to do its basic things and then let the free market go from there.
That's the essence of conservatism.
And I think it's the essence of America. I mean, that's what we found. They'd be rolling under their graves right now.
Right.
They realize we paid 40%, if not more, of everything we earn in taxes, let alone the heavy hand of Washington, which is so counter to what Jefferson, even Hamilton, who is somewhat of a nationalist, would say.
Florida has had an immense amount of success. The media will beat up anything a conservative does. That's just the nature of the mainstream media. But Florida overall has had great success. You mentioned the balanced budget. You inherited
$4 billion.
$4 billion,
Yeah.
$4 billion at the state level. And you immediately had to get to work, but you were successful in balancing the budget without ever raising taxes and fees.
Well, it was substantial, and it was a challenging time. And what allowed me to make those decisions together with my fellow senators, let alone the representatives, and the new governor at the time, Rick Scott, was we understood what everyday Floridians were going through. They were in a tough spot. There was a 10 or 11% unemployment rate. They were balancing their budgets or making things work. And I felt like we should do the same. And so what we did is the old saying is, why do people rob banks? Because that's where the money is. So we kind of looked at the same way and said, we're not going to rob people and tax them. We looked at it and said, where is the money being spent? And we saw it in two areas: healthcare, biggest part of the budget, and the second biggest part, of course, were pension programs. And what we were able to say is we need to change those two programs, maneuver them in such a way so that it made sense. And it reflected more the private sector, what they were going through, so the government isn't have favored treatment. So I'll just give you the one example with pensions, for example. The pension system, if you were a state employee, was vastly superior to anyone who had their own 401k. And they were getting these tremendous benefits, and it was costing the state a lot of money, and they weren't paying into their system.
Now break it down. When you say they, you're talking state retired workers,
state current workers, and retires. Now, we were saying is, look, if you're already retired, we're not going to undercut what you already have, but we're going to change the system moving forward, because most of us are in a situation where you pay part, your employer pays part into your 401k. We want to do the same thing, where the benefits wouldn't be superior to people who are in the private sector. Would he made that transition to a 401k as opposed to a traditional pension plan, which is you get a set amount into as long as you live. So that was one thing we did, and it saved over $1 billion. The other thing that we looked at is that Medicaid. For those who don't know, Medicaid is not Medicare. Medicaid is welfare, okay? And some of the Medicaid was actually superior benefits to people who are paying for their own private system. We said, well, that's not fair. People who pay their own money are getting inferior benefits to people who are getting it for free. And I'm not saying we want inferior care for them, but it shouldn't be better. Yeah, very frustrating. And so what we did with pensions and now Medicaid is we said, we're not going to make it better than the people who have to pay of their own pocket, let alone who are paying their tax dollars for the quote, people who are getting free money. So that saved billions of dollars. So between those two and cutting around the edges and some other things, we balanced the budget, didn't raise taxes. And what it did more importantly is it sent a message to the United States and said, hey, Florida's got their act together. We're going to relocate our business to Florida. And that grew our economy.
And it was done in a time of a massive economic downturn in the state of Florida.
And then to compound that, we were losing NASA. Remember that? Right, when they got rid of
the shuttle was winding down.
So we had to attract all. So now, because we made investments, we gave incentives for Blue Origin, and those different companies that come in here, SpaceX, et cetera, and say, hey, do commercial space. It goes to that sense where we saw the future. And we recognize that we can't just give away things. We need to incentivize. And so people said Florida's got their economic act together, not raising taxes. And so Rick Scott, to his credit, the new governor, was willing to get on the phone and call companies and say, hey, come to Florida.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to raise your taxes. We're not going to increase regulations. We're not going to make it easier for people to sue you. And so when they're saying, should I be in California where they sue everybody? They're raising taxes, raising or increasing the number of regulations on business. They're getting the heck out of California, Illinois, New York, these big liberal states, and they say, we're going to come to Florida, and they're bringing high-paying jobs.
Florida has become kind of like a split model. Nationwide, you go to the more conservative states and they look at Florida and they think, man, Florida's just so successful right now.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, the media looks at Florida like we are just the cesspool of the political world.
Yeah.
Why the marketing chasm?
Well, it's for one reason. You just magic words, the media. The media is people who enter the media today disproportionately have a very liberal mindset that they, in a lot of ways, they don't have the guts to run for office. So they're sitting there from their newspaper telling you what you should be doing every day. And I think that that's just the media bias that clearly exists. I'll debate anyone on that issue as far as the bias is concerned. And all we can do, and I've had this conversation with Rick Scott, Marco Rubio, let alone Governor DeSantis, is we've always said, you know what, they're going to call us one anyway. So do what you think is right, despite what the media is going to say. You can't make them happy. You never can satisfy them. And so that's what I think we've done in Florida is that, you know, we have a vision. We have a conservative mindset, especially in economic matters, and we're going to move forward with that. And that's because you can't take on that behemoth, especially now with the social media groups getting behind the traditional media or liberal media. You know, Fox does a decent job, but even they have some pressure points. So I think what we need, it's the reason why people are flocking here. They say, you know what, I can go to Florida and be free. And Governor DeSantis has really hammered this home, as you can imagine.
What do you see for his future? I mean, I know you talked to him and you're a little bit more in the circle. Yeah. What do you see playing out this coming November? It seems like he is in the lead and they're just like kind of needling him away. Mm-hmm. But we're coming up on primary, and how do you see it playing out?
Well, a couple things first. In fact, in the very spot we're sitting in, we had the governor and his wife right here, Casey, at our home not too long ago, and I had an event for him because we really believe in what he's doing. And what I really like about him as an educator myself, the guy is well read, he's brilliant, wicked smart, mm-hmm. and you know, if you contrast him with Donald Trump, of course, are an incredibly successful businessman, and Ron DeSantis, an incredibly bright student of history, and understands the conservative mindset in the intellectual sense, not just the practical mm-hmm. sense, right? So it gives him the ability, even maybe more so than Donald Trump in some cases, of getting into the historical arguments in depth, which really knocks liberals off balance because they're not as bright as him, and he has facts as opposed to other scenarios. I mean, Trump was so good at other things as well. So I think the governor has that dynamic, and he's confident about it. He knows in his heart where he stands in the issue, and he has the facts and history to back it up, which a lot of reporters don't. And that's why I like it so engaging to see him challenge reporters on the facts, and they back away. You saw that very much with that Don't Say Gay bill, which was really about let's protect our kids bill, right? Why would you want to educate kids before the 4th grade about sex education? They let them be kids. And you're seeing these teachers come out on social media where they're admitting they're trying to preach. You know, as an educator myself, and my students can back this up, if you took a conservative position in my classroom, I'd give you the opposite, so at least people can make a choice of where they stand, as opposed to pushing your agenda or your ideology down someone's throat. Because in the end, you never want to coerce people, because if you do that and they hear the other side, they're going to resent you forever. So I to get to your point about Ron DeSantis and the 2022 election, I think he's going to win pretty handily. I think he's going to win by 6, 8 points.
Polls are showing that thus far.
And rightfully so. Plus, he's raised a heck of a lot of money.
Right.
And Charlie Crist and Nikki Fried are engaged in their battle to move to the left mm-hmm. in the primary. So I think he's well positioned. Marco Rubio, I think, is well positioned now also because of course, he's a conservative, but he has proven to be a bipartisan deal maker. They just passed what's called the Pact Act, which helps our veterans.
The Pact Act had a rider in it that just seemed insane that they slipped in there. Mm-hmm. And as soon as they rebutted that, it was just game on that Republicans hate. Mm-hmm. They trotted out Jon Stewart and said, oh, the Republicans want to shoot this down, But they never went in and said, hey, listen, here's why.
We talked about earlier with the media bias. Look, the Democrats they're good at playing games oftentimes, and they recognize that they had the leverage here, helping veterans or not helping veterans, and they want to spend more. They just proved it, of course, recently with this so-called Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
It's just Inflation Reduction Act will spend more money. I mean, counterintuitive, right? But they recognized they had the Republicans on this veterans issue because most veterans are very much pro-Republican, not Democrat, and they wanted to help these folks, which were legitimately hurt in their service, or let alone with Camp Lejeune and other things. And that's what it is. They said, okay, we're going to make this required spending. And that gave them $400 billion more in discretionary spending, the ability to spend even more.
With no caps.
No, and that's the difficult part. And because the media and the pressure points were there, the Democrats accelerated it. And I'll give you just kind of my overall take on it. It seems like right now in American politics, we're in a situation when the Democrats are in power, they're going to expand the size and scope of government, and too far, right? The problem is even when Republicans
but you can't say they're just growing government because that sounds good. That comes at a great cost.
Oh, again, when I say growing government, that means all the bureaucrats you have to hire, all the new taxes you have to pay for, and the liberties that get taken away from you because you have less spending power, or the government has more power over you because of new regs. Mm-hmm. But what they do is they expand the size and scope and cost of government, best way to put it. And then when the Republicans come in, it's almost a victory if nothing happens. It's the closest thing to eternal life is a government program. So once you create that government program and you have people beneficiaries, those beneficiaries are going to fight any repeal of any law. And so we're on this holding pattern.
The other little magical nuance about the Democrats is once a bill is in, it's never gone.
That's what I'm saying.
There's no expiration on these programs. There's no, they get extended and they get extended. And even when they have a quote unquote sunset period, they get extended. There's a bill that extends it.
Well, even the latest thing they just passed over the weekend dealing with the inflation reduction, what did it really do? It doubled the number of IRS agents, so the likelihood of being audited is obviously higher. And the second one is that they expanded Obamacare until 2024, until after the elections, because those subsidies are now still in place. So they keep that going. And so it's basically, again, that cost shift, but more importantly, the price shift that's going on where people are subsidizing others. And I don't think that's what the founders intended. We want to help those folks who are in need, no doubt, but you don't want to create a welfare state that becomes overwhelming and no longer affordable or take away the incentives to work.
And we're seeing it here in Brevard, and your review committee is about to see the fancy title now is affordable housing, which is really, we've seen it over the years as low-income housing projects. What are the solutions? What are the easy answers?
Yeah, I don't think there is one. There's no silver bullet out there. We would have tried to address it. I mean, the fact is people want to live here. It's supply and demand laws. And so when people want to live here, they're willing to pay more to live here. And you're going to see that constant reality. And that's what happens in any place. It's advantageous to live. You couple that now with inflation and other matters, it makes it even doubly difficult. I'm really impressed by a lot of the organizations that get by not with government dollars, but with charitable dollars and help people make that transition. What you don't want to do is make that subsidy forever. You want to help people make that transition. And when younger people come to me and say, I want this, that, and the other, I said, look, I remember before I was 30 years old, I had a roommate. I bought my own house, but I had to have a roommate to subsidize, my thing, helping the government. And I think the younger generation has to understand that there's going to be some tough times. And there's that transition that does take place. It might mean after college even that you have that roommate that you need, or if you get married, both are going to have to work to afford to live in a place like this. Because you can't just rely on income redistribution. We're going to give them some flexibility if voters choose to have some potential revenue sources for that, but not tax dollars to do it. But it's a challenging thing because a lot of people who work in our restaurants, construction, really can't afford to live here. I mean, the average price right now where I live on the Barrier Island is $550,000 for a house. And the truth is,
I'm here too.
And look, I think what's going to happen, I think you're going to see a correction in the housing market. I mean, one of the things that's almost going to force it in some ways is because when you raise interest rates in order to try to hold down inflation rates, you're going to see that natural situation take place.
And the inventory. You're going to start to see the inventory.
Well, you're seeing, I think what you're seeing right now in Brevard is we're becoming almost like Weston, down south across in Boca. You go west of 95, It's happening right now with
Yep.
Vera. I
Yep.
mean, that's where all the new housing is
Yep.
going to go in, and that it will lower prices, at least compare with the Barrier Island, because there's that desire and need. But it's going to be a challenging time to say the least, and I hope that one of the things that I really focused in on that whole Charter Review Commission, which I chair, was don't do anything that could potentially increase the cost of anything. As my wife would say, the doctor, do no harm. And that was kind of a thing, whether it be term limits. There was another one they wanted to put all these new environmental taxes and so on. We killed those because, again, it's not our job to try to find new ways to take money out of your pocket.
Behind every great man is a great woman. Of course, you have Stephanie that is brilliant.
I agree.
You know, just a fantastic person. But again, we're not here to talk about real estate. I want to ask you, Mike, what's your future?
Well, I think what I've really enjoyed in, as I call it, the afterlife. I've been out of politics for 10 years now.
Have you?
Elected politics, right? Yeah. But I'm heavily involved. I mean, I held Sheriff Ivey's first ever fundraiser. I think he's done a super job as our sheriff. I support many of our county commissioners, city commissioners. Of course, I'm the head fundraiser for Bill Posey. It's important to me that we elect the right people, and I want them to be elected for the right reasons. And so I've stayed very involved with Rick Scott, Marco Rubio, of course, Governor DeSantis, because that's our role as citizens, to be heavily involved, whether you're in office or not. Support those people who share your values. I don't know what the future holds. I love what I do now. I help clients around the country, in some cases around the world. And my job every day is I'm a problem solver. They'll call me up and say, I got this problem with another business or with the government. Help me solve it. And I try to do that. And my political outlet right now, not only in great shows like yours with Space Coast Daily, and the whole team there is super. I do Fox 35 every Monday morning. So
Right,
I comment on state and local issues. So it kind of gets my political fix in a lot of ways. I'll see what the future holds. There's a lot of folks talking about the future.
Blonde hair, blue eyes. I mean, you got that TV vibe.
That's my daughter, Reagan. She's the blonde hair. But the best thing is, like, I got a great life. I mean, I've got 3 super kids. My wife is a superstar, as you mentioned. And it's kind of hard to go back into that political bubble when you're enjoying life and have such super friends. And as you know, my father recently passed. It was a very eye-opening moment that mortality is real. It is. And I've had a lot of tough days because of it. And so I'm doing a lot of soul searching to see what the future might hold. But I couldn't be happy with Bill Posey. I mean, he went into the Congress as a conservative. He stayed conservative. I think Marco Rubio has done a very good job as senator. I think Rick Scott's a superstar. He has proved himself as governor. And we have the best governor in the country by far. And so you can't complain much right now.
It's really not even
right?
close.
Right?
It's amazing when you really break it down. And like you, I'm not a political figure, but doing what I do, I have to pay a lot of really close attention. I get to sit next to great people like you, and I always laugh at people when I say, I get my news directly from the source. I don't need your opinion. And at the same time, if I'm even baited into one of those things on Facebook, I'm always like, hey, I have an outlet. Let's sit and debate this. Crickets.
Yeah, and I think
the anonymity is just where all the power is.
Well, we talked about it last week, and I was having the same discussion at lunch earlier today with one of my clients. It's such a shame that the media has become just a cheerleader for one side. I mean, what makes America the greatest country that ever existed is that we're willing to have a true debate and the better idea won. It happens in government and in the private sector. If you produce a better product, you're going to be the billionaire. And if you don't, you're going to fail. That competition is what makes America great. And what's happening right now in the media right now is that if you don't take their side, they're going to literally yell you down.
Oh, it's going to happen. Yeah.
And
we saw that with Brett Kavanaugh.
100%.
You know, in hindsight, which actually proved to be this huge made-up story, this huge lie. You know, somehow the word lie never stuck.
And it kind of goes to the January 6th thing. Whatever you feel about that, I understand. But when they didn't let the other side provide a defense, which is a basic American tenet, every hearing in my lifetime is always both sides get their story out and the winner wins, so to speak.
It's a select committee, and they select what you're going to see, and people don't understand
and that to me, if you really believe that was the crisis that they push, then be willing to stand the challenges to the idea, because that makes your idea better, right? And the fact that they did the kangaroo court like they're doing is the reason why no one's paying attention. And I think that it's a shame because it really undercuts things. And getting to my story about my former life at the University of Florida, I remember when some conservative political figures came to give their speech at the University of Florida, the left would simply just yell them down. And I'm amazed that, a couple things happened, which a lot of people brought to me. Obviously, January 6th was chaos, but there was actually a Republican congressman shot at in Washington, D.C.
That's a softball game.
And remember the incidents at Wisconsin when they tried to change the labor laws there. They took over the Capitol building. And again, what I think why a lot of people are moving to the conservative element is they're saying, you know what? There's clearly a double standard.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised that the media hasn't realized, half America is conservative, not more now.
And you're good friends with Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was like in that fight. She couldn't go out to dinner with her family without, being pelted with the rotten fruit, if you will. She just couldn't.
Disgraceful.
She was just completely.
And if we did that,
absolutely not. So you're able to go to restaurants where they're now in Arkansas, of course.
I haven't seen her in a little while because she's campaigning. She's being the next governor of Arkansas, but we spent a lot of time together.
I am rooting for her 100%.
She's going to do great.
And you and I had talked about another candidate here in Florida that I'm really rooting for is Anna Paulina Luna. Yeah. There's just something about them where
what an upgrade from Charlie Crist to Anna Paulina Luna.
I know, right? And you follow them on Facebook because of the character that they have, and you're like, oh, I just fantastic. Sarah Palin, as ostracized as she was. We had a woman, but all of a sudden, she wasn't the woman that they liked. So the rules changed.
Well, it's kind of like African Americans. Clarence Thomas didn't have the right opinion to the left, so suddenly he's not. The exact kind of African American they want. So we're in that boat. Look, I think most people watch this understand what's happening, and this is why it's so important that the social media is out there and doesn't get censored. Let free opinions go out there, and the best idea wins.
Yep. Well, Mike, I can't thank you enough for having us here in your home, a beautiful home, and I'm sitting where the governor sat.
That's right,
so
right here.
It's going on my highlight reel. But thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
And it's so great. And thank you for all you do for our community. And I know the fight is out there.
Yeah, thank you.
We're just getting in the heat of it. We got a couple more months of this, and after that, that's we're fighting now, but the work doesn't begin until next January.
That's right. So, elections are one thing, governing's another. Get out and vote. Got to do it.
That's it. I'm Ron Lighthall in the beautiful home of Mike Haridopolos. Thank you for joining us right here on Space Coast Daily.